DT have created their own private network in a hangar in Hamburg, and it's because Lufthansa wanted their own network. So theoretically, network slicing, you can actually sell them a network which is completely on its own. It doesn't have to, and it can be configured whichever way they want.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're not too ill this week, are we, Ian? That cold's still knocking about. Yeah. We don't reckon it's coronavirus still, though. So we got the usual suspects, and Jamie's still injured, of me, Ian from Light Reading, and Jamie. What we're going to be talking about this week, we are going to start by talking about Nokia, because all the stuff that got the most read on the site this week was Nokia stuff. So there's at least 3 stories we can talk about there. And then, Ian, you've written some great stuff on sort of Chinese vendor market share, especially looking at it from a ZTE perspective. We don't talk about them that often, so that's a good thing to talk about. And then Jamie's been sniffing around the investment climate in telecoms, specifically with to do with sort of fixed line, fibre, that sort of thing. So we're going to conclude on that. And God knows what tangents we'll meander off onto in between now and then. And just to remind you that if you're watching it on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and countless other podcasting platforms. So, Nokia, I'll take lead on that, as for once I'm the one who's been getting all the reads this week. It's normally Jamie kicking my ass, but I've stepped up to the plate this week. I'll just chill out for the rest of the year. I've done my bit.
You've done your week.
Yeah, I've done my week. Over to you, Jamie. And the story I wrote about Nokia that got the most reads this week was a headline something like Nokia plays the ethics card. And it's just a little press release from them saying that they had been named one of the most ethical companies in the world. And I thought, okay, yeah, fair enough, sort of one of these corporate social responsibility type of press releases and all that. But then I'd look and they'd been named it by a company called Ethisphere that I'd never heard of. And I thought, okay, when you've got a company with ethic in their name, you sort of you start thinking, okay, what's going on here? And they're a legitimate company, but their whole thing is advising other companies on corporate social responsibility, tree hugging, whatever.
So like
it is.
An advisory firm as well as someone that rates them.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a well-known thing that this sort of thing is an increasingly big deal in the corporate world. Yeah. You've got big investment portfolios like BlackRock. Who now just won't invest in companies unless they tick that box sufficiently. Okay. Yeah. You've got other ones.
And they measure them on green things as well, I imagine, don't they?
Things,
green if you won't invest.
We've got tree hugging, we've got general social responsibility, we've got all the identity politics, which I won't get into because that'll just get me in trouble, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And they increasingly have to tick a bunch of these boxes. There's representation along different demographics, all that sort of thing. And it's actually become quite mainstream. Just fine. It's not for me to say one way or the other. I'm personally not a big fan of positive discrimination, but I can see why, for example, in our industry where it's long known that women are very underrepresented in our industry, I've got some sympathy with people going, let's make extra sure that we give women a crack at getting into the boardroom and getting the top jobs and all that sort of thing. Not to the point of positive discrimination, but certainly let's have equality of opportunity. I completely agree with that. Anyway, so they do that sort of thing, which is fine, but I do think, personally, I think a lot of this stuff from corporates is a little bit cynical. Yeah. It's not like they actually care. They're just worried about the adverse PR, and they're worried about, their stock price taking a hit by not being included in a big fund or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so this company helps them out with that, and then it also awards this thing which everyone makes a big fuss about and sends out press releases like Nokia did. And I had a little look at them. This year, 132 companies got most ethical company in the world, which itself is a somewhat dilatory, if that's a word.
Right, so that's
diluting number.
It's like a little star that you get to show that you've kind of
sort
passed
of thing,
a certain level.
sort of tick. Yeah.
And how do they measure it? Do they provide details on that? Or?
Well, there we go. So how do they measure it? So it turns out that I should have fired up the story, but they've got some sort of proprietary algorithm or mathematical system. Yeah. And they ask the companies all these questions. How many trees have you hugged today? All that sort of thing, and that all goes into the algorithm, and then they get a score at the end of it. And we're led to believe, although I didn't research the methodology deeply enough, to be honest, I couldn't see a lot of really detailed methodology. It was all around this algorithm, which is registered. It's called like the something index or something like that. Like I said, I should have been more professional and actually fired up the story and got my facts straight. But you get the gist.
Yeah.
And that's that. And you sort of think, okay, well, you got to start somewhere. You can't just go, oh, they seem nice. There's got to be some methodology. But then it turned out. Then I clicked through on the site to find out more about this proprietary index thing, and it very quickly got me to a bit that said you've got to apply to be part of it. So they're not checking out every single company in the world. They're only checking out companies that choose to be part of this assessment process. Then it turned out, and scroll down a little bit, turns out to be part of the assessment process costs you at least $3,000.
Right.
And so that just led me to think, well, what's going on here then? You got to pay $3,000 to be part of it, and if you don't pay $3,000, you're not part of it.
Yeah.
So how does that make you one of the most ethical
and only
companies in the
10
world?
companies have paid $3,000.
Well, at least 132 have, because that many were given it. So it just didn't feel very exhaustive. By the way, of those 132, over 100 are American.
Okay. So they were saying they were the most ethical.
Well, that's their little label that they get to
do
press releases about. Most ethical company, according to Ethisphere. And I just like calling out that stuff in the corporate world.
Yeah.
That's not to say, I'm not saying Nokia isn't ethical, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're lovely.
It's such a hazy term though anyway, isn't it?
Quite.
Being ethical, it's such a hard thing to measure. I mean, at least with sort of tree hugging, you can, you've got sort of proper metrics like carbon emissions and offsets, whereas being ethical, I mean, what does that mean? Sort of employing a certain number of people in this category?
Well, quite. And like I said, there is, if you go onto the Ethisphere site, there is some degree of granularity as to the methodology of how they do it. And presumably, if you wanted to, and I didn't ask them to, you could even get hold of their questionnaire. Yeah. And I'm sure it ticks all the boxes, but it's still selective. And the thing that diminishes its significance to me is the fact that it's provided by a for-profit company and then they charge you for inclusion. So that was that, and that got lots of people's interest. And I haven't had Nokia have a go at me yet, or Ethisphere. I was kind of expecting them to.
Give it a few days.
Well, it published it earlier on this week.
Yeah. They're preparing their response now.
Something like that, yeah. And then a second thing was much more telecoms-y, which was they have got a software product that they say allows you to do network slicing on pre-standalone 5G cores. Okay. So my understanding, and I will defer to you on this, Ian, because you're definitely more technologically savvy on this stuff than I am. Put you on the spot there. You better not screw it up.
Okay.
That network slicing is really a sort of native thing as part of the 5G core that will start to get implemented after Release 16 and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, with Release 16. I think.
Release, yeah. But they're saying, well, if you want to check it out, if you want to dip your toe in the pool, you can do it now thanks to this Nokia bit of software that allows you to do it on 4G and non-standalone 5G.
Okay.
So
there is standalone. Standalone is pre-Release 16. There is a standalone within Release 15.
Okay.
It's just Release 16 has support for additional functionality, like network slicing, for instance.
But I thought they said that the case was you can do it in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, not right now, but in the summer.
In the summers after Release 16 has been frozen anyway, so everyone should be able to offer
if it hasn't been put off by coronavirus.
Well, yeah, but it'd be the standard specifications are going to be frozen in June. Mm. So if Nokia is saying in the summer, post-June, we can offer you network slicing services, well, that's just a PR twist because everyone can offer network slicing services after the specifications have been frozen.
I suppose so, but I presume they would have to be after the specifications frozen, even though people have probably got a 99% visibility as to what that specification will be. You presume there'd still be some kind of delay after it's frozen before people could start to actually produce commercially viable.
There is a bit.
I mean that's what that. But I mean, I haven't read the story or read the press release, but my presumption there is Nokia is just being very, very elusive with their details. Did they give a concrete date?
They said summer.
I reckon they're being quite elusive.
fair enough.
But this is something that someone picked up the other night. Someone said to me the other night, and they were saying like, "Oh, well, Nokia's talking a load of rubbish there because blah blah blah. There's no standards for it." And it's like, well, yeah, there will be. You know, Nokia hasn't said they can do it right now, and they're doing it without standards. They're doing it theoretically after the standards have been frozen.
Well, they're doing it not according to the standard that's going to come in releases. This is a proprietary thing of theirs. Yeah. They're saying that if you're a customer of ours, for whatever the software will cost, we can let you sort of replicate the network slicing experience on your pre-standalone network. I mean, Jamie's scepticism may well be spot on. I certainly, when I wrote it, I mean, I had on that same thing we were at. I presume you're talking about Wednesday, Jamie. I had people coming up to me going, you're talking shit, Scott. And I was like, look, don't shoot the messenger.
I'm
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just telling you what they claim.
It's not the technology even that I'm sceptical of. It's the sort of use of it in a way. Because I know it gets hyped a lot, and there's a lot of talk about network slicing and how important it's going to be for, running enterprise services and being able to do lots of, provision different sort of services over the same infrastructure. But, you go to these conferences where they actually talk about the commercial side of things and how 5G is getting used, and everybody's excited about the enterprise opportunity, which is when things like network slicing really come in. But we still seem to be some way away from actually having real sort of concrete stuff happening and people being ready for it. Business readiness for that is. I know there was some data that came out at this Omdia event that Jamie and I were at earlier in the week about businesses being ready for. I think Jamie mentioned it actually. It's an Ernst & Young study about business readiness for 5G, but it's still a majority of businesses. So I think Ernst & Young was saying are not ready, and then network slicing is quite a sort of specific thing. It's like, I know some of the concerns on the operator side is nobody at the business actually goes out and says we want network slicing. They say we want you to do this kind of service for us in the factory. We want this to be provided. It's not like the
the telecoms industry has decided that's best done.
Yeah, it's best done on. Yeah. It's for their bit. It's like an operator thing, really. It's a benefit for them because it's an efficient way of doing it. But it's not something you'd as a Shell, you wouldn't go out and say to your network operator, we need network slicing now because otherwise we're in real trouble. Yeah. This is like an urgent need for us. It's just something to me that the operator needs to do because otherwise, I mean, I actually talked to Orange a little bit about this week, and they were chatting up the whole sort of enterprise stuff to do with 5G. And they said one of the reasons you need network slicing is you can't go out, this is their argument, you can't go out and sort of build a separate core in each of these facilities. You go around and sort of trying to provide on-premises services to a factory or something. You wouldn't go out and roll. I mean, some people are going to disagree with this, but you wouldn't go out and build a separate core network and do everything, just
You'd think not, unless they were shelling out a ton of dough.
Well, some people are going to do this, I think. Okay. But they want to use network slicing and do it in the sort of way that they were seeing is much more efficient to do. Yeah. So it's very much a kind of operator-led thing, really. I don't see. I mean, maybe this kind of CIOs on the business side of it are aware of it and are talking about it and see some attractions.
So to recap, the point of it is supposed to be. So we've got these three cardinal points of 5G, which is the enhanced mobile broadband, which is basically more 4G. Yeah. The sort of massive machine-type communication, big IoT stuff, which isn't necessarily an intrinsic part of 5G, i.e. we can already do IoT.
You can do it, but without 5G,
yeah. But 5G is expected to sort of really help with scale and efficiency. And then there's the most juicy part of 5G, which is this low latency, ultra-reliable play.
Yeah.
And then it's supposed to, and the reason you do network slicing is if you've got a base station near a factory and they're all about the low latency or the IoT, then you can move the dial on the character of the kind of radio, the kind of service that comes out of that base station. That's my understanding of what network slicing is all about. Is that more or less right? Or
it's like it's offering you kind of carve out a dedicated service on a bit of the network basically, so you can provide guarantees that you wouldn't be able to provide on a sort of 4G environment, as far as I understand it. So I guess if it's presented in that way to the customers, then but they can't just go out and say we're going to offer network slicing, because what the customer's going to say is we want a 99.999% security guarantees if we're going to do it over mobile, and we want this and we want that. And then maybe then the conversation goes on to the operators saying, well, we can do this with this technology called network slicing, and that's where 5G comes in and everything. So maybe being a bit too cynical, but
but I think you're right as a feature. I mean, I was chatting to.
I don't think the customers will ever see it. Because you don't actually say to someone, "Oh, we can offer you network slicing."
Yeah.
You say to them, "Well, we've got a slice, which is this slice of the network has been calibrated for use cases in the healthcare industry, or this has been calibrated to broadcasting, so it's got a higher proportion of upload as opposed to download."
Yeah.
And you don't actually tell them about the slice. You can just design services onto
and you have a service level
parts.
agreement that just says this is what we'll deliver.
Yeah.
And let us worry about the plumbing.
Or you can. I mean, this is what's interesting about this private network thing is that Lufthansa wanted. So Lufthansa and DT have created their own private network in a hangar in Hamburg. And it's because Lufthansa wanted their own network. So theoretically, network slicing, you can actually sell them a network which is completely on its own. It doesn't have to, and it can be configured whichever way they want.
Yeah.
So I don't think network slicing. I don't think the customer has to know about it. I think it's just the provision of service and the creation of services sort of evolve in the telco business model.
Yeah.
And so to bring it back to the Nokia thing and to be sort of sympathetic to the reason why they might do it other than just pure gimmickry, the way they positioned it is we're saying, okay, operator, if you want to have a go at some of these services like we were just discussing now, here's your chance to do it earlier than you might have thought. Here's your chance to give it a go. Here's your chance to go up to Lufthansa and go, we can do this for you.
Yeah.
In fact, someone in the comments on Jamie's story, I believe, put in a link to a Nokia press release with them collaborating with Lufthansa.
Right, okay.
So it could be that there was a strong overlap between those two things. I mean, it's interesting. I was chatting to my dad the other day.
Is he into network slicing?
Well, he wasn't.
But he is now. You've won him over.
Now, there's nothing he likes more than a loaf of sliced network. But no, he was originally we were talking about Huawei because he didn't know. He was sort of going, why are we letting Huawei get involved in 5G? And he didn't know about that security center that Huawei pays to have, but we get to snoop in all that stuff. And he was like, well, that changes a lot. I didn't realise how much oversight we had over Huawei gear.
Right. So he changed his mind now then.
So he changed his mind about that. He now agrees with my view that we were right to listen to our security experts rather than Trump's hectoring.
Well, we listened to Trump's hectoring a little bit, didn't we? We tried to keep them happy by doing a few things.
Yeah, but apparently apparently Bojo's still got the hairdryer treatment over the phone.
Oh, really? That's still whinging at him to get him.
Well,
to
I don't know if it's still happening,
it.
but there was that one story.
There are some Conservative ministers who want it completely banned, apparently, aren't there? Anyway,
yeah.
So, yeah.
But I think that's for those are for political reasons, not for technical reasons.
What? Because we're not going to get on well with the Americans if we don't, right?
Exactly. I mean, Farage, for example, for all his bluster about how we've got to be independent, now he's got to strop.
Independent as long as we get on with the US.
Yeah, as long as we get on with his mate Trump.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then he went, Scott, what is 5G? And I thought that's a really good question. A really important thing for us to do.
Yeah.
Immersed as we are in our little echo chamber. Yeah, exactly. Well, 4G.
It's better than 4G, isn't it? Is the answer.
And I thought, okay, I mean, he's a bright person, my dad, but he's just not. He just doesn't spend every day thinking about the telecoms industry.
Well, there's a lot of people in that category.
Yeah. And I said, look, to be honest, Dad, it's not really a consumer play at all. It's a B2B play. And that coincides with what we were just saying about network slicing.
Yeah.
It really is a B2B play. That the enhanced mobile broadband bit is by far the least exciting part of 5G, especially as a lot of it. I mean, I know there's new radio, but I'd still.
Well, it could be a consumer player if there are some of these low latency services that get used in a consumer context.
Like mobile VR and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people are sceptical about those, but
in the near future, I am. I mean, it's just your classic utopian thing, like who used to take the piss out of robotic surgery and stuff like that.
But it might be around in 10 years' time when 6G comes along.
But that's not. Yes, well, quite. That's not a thing to necessarily get consumers excited about now.
Yeah.
And I just said, from my point of view, it's mainly a B2B play. It's about efficiency. It's about automation. It's about remote control. It's about smart factories and all that sort of thing. So yes. So but what didn't surprise me is that a Nokia story got a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Probably as much from Ericsson, Huawei, and other people, just like what are they up to?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but when I publish a story about one of the big kit vendors, I'm sort of imagining most of my traffic's going to come from their competitors.
Yeah, well,
who just want
them and the competitors, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean,
and they all employ a lot of people.
Sometimes, judging by the comments, it's definitely the company itself, because I get all their loyalists calling me a bastard.
But I mean, together they all have huge numbers of employees, don't they? So
and they're all keeping an eye on each other.
a lot of eyeballs potentially.
That's what business journalism is all about. Everyone's just keeping an eye on each other, aren't they? So then the last Nokia thing was very much journalism. And even the thing it's journalised from was speculative, which is a Bloomberg piece where they'd spoken to some of those anonymous insiders that people like Bloomberg seem to have scattered about the place.
Yeah.
That said Nokia has brought in sort of corporate strategy consultants to review its options. Now, the only reason that was noteworthy, obviously, companies are constantly reviewing their options all the time.
Well, I find headlines like that. I mean, I did write something on it.
Yeah, so did I. So we can't be too snotty.
But I think my intro was something like it'd be more of a surprise if they weren't reviewing strategic options.
But the way it's framed is this is an accelerated level of sort of introspection brought on by the fact that they're worried about profits and they're worried about quarterlies. And that sort of thing. And I'll stop talking a sec because I'm aware that I've been banging on, but the most interesting one, and again it was very hedged. It was like options could include this, that, and the other. They could include anything.
Yeah,
they could include selling the family jewels, whatever.
He's watching the footy.
What?
Or is it another?
No, it was nothing. That noise was outside. Did you think Pierre was watching the footy on his phone?
It sounded like someone like cheering. So.
Oh, there was.
I was watching highlights of last night's game.
Oh, there was sound. It was Pierre. You were right. So unprofessional. Last week it's Jamie and his Monster Munch.
There's no sound.
Lots of people, Jamie, by the way, commented on the Monster Munch episode.
It
went viral.
There was I thinking Jamie would be all contrite. I just thought it was funny. But believe me, I wasn't saying it as a remonstration. I just thought it was funny that people were talking about it. Yes, but so the most juicy bit of sort of corporate strategy is M&A. So I'll hand it over to you. And one of the speculations in the story was like M&A with Ericsson, but I thought it was very unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of barriers to it. I think partly competition reasons, because obviously regulators have to sign this off in various countries when mergers like that happen, and we've just gone through a period of concern about the amount of consolidation there's already been in the market. So, doing that would leave, if it did happen from a competition perspective, you would have two companies, Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei, with about 80%, I think, of the mobile
and in a lot of places
of the mobile infrastructure market.
And in a lot of places where Huawei's either banned or curtailed,
they would be the only company, so it'd be a monopoly. So I think from that, so you've got the regulators themselves, you've got the operators who are all running around saying, so it's not going to satisfy any of the customers because they want more diversity, not less.
Quite.
And then mega mergers like this don't have a great track record in the telecom sector, and Nokia's made perhaps the best example of that. I looked at its share price when the Alcatel-Lucent deal was first announced, which was, I think, April 2015 when they first said they were going to acquire it, and they were about €7.40 per share.
Okay.
And they're now at about 360.
Wow,
that's half after this merger that was supposed to be transformative,
definitive
and make them
M&A.
Yeah. So,
but when was that?
5 years ago.
5 years ago, okay.
Halving of the share price in the last 5 years after a transformative deal is not, and this, you look at the Alcatel-Lucent merger
There'd be another couple of things to factor in there as well, because like in the years before that, the Nokia phone brand would have still existed in 5 years before that.
No, Nokia was a network company only in 2015. It had been for quite a while, just a networks company. So
they flogged the handsets Microsoft in the early 10s.
Have a look what the share price was when they flogged it, and is it just a recalculation over a sustained period?
I don't think its share price has gone down between now and then because of anything to do with the, or in the run up to that because of anything to do with the phone business. That's going back to 2012, I think, 2011.
I agree. I think all the phone stuff was priced in.
You've got all the Alcatel-Lucent merger itself, which was a bit of a disaster culturally and business-wise. That was a loss-making, and it was a mess. It was bad for years. Nokia's own sort of merger with the Siemens Networks business was very kind of problematic. So, and you look at them now, according, on sort of the basis of, I think, of international financial reporting standards, they're still reporting. They might just be profitable, but we're still reporting losses last year. They're still, they've got a kind of very thin operating margins. Yeah. They've got all sorts of issues going on. You look at so this is another reason why it would be challenging, I think, is this whole 5G product difficulty that they've run into was partly, when I spoke to the CFO about that, he blamed that partly on distractions and issues to do with the integration of the Alcatel-Lucent business. So then so if you've got Ericsson and Nokia, the biggest overlap there clearly is the mobile side. Yeah. That's going to be a massive thing to have to try and deal with.
Yeah, the amount of redundancy on the RAN side.
Huawei's going to love it while they're trying to do that. So I just thought that was all. The other issue is disposals, which I think is an issue for them as well, because the whole point of buying Alcatel-Lucent was to have this end-to-end, and they keep going on about this, our end-to-end capability. They can provide fixed mobile core network services. They have kind of the full portfolio. And that gives them this kind of strength that Ericsson doesn't have, because it's a much more sort of mobile-focused player. So which bit do they sacrifice, and how do they justify that after having made such a fuss about having end-to-end? What I could see them doing perhaps is maybe trying to sell the licensing stuff, or maybe these businesses that now look a bit more standalone, like this software thing they've got. They've got their software business, and they've also got the enterprise stuff, which is now actually called Nokia Enterprise, isn't it? It used to be a kind of part of the bigger networks business, but it's now kind of being run as a separate thing, and it's growing really fast. I think from a small base, but that's kind of 30% growth each year at the moment, something like that.
There's
it's
some
high
distinct
anyway.
precedent for companies reorganising around big obvious business groups prior to disposals. So Nokia did that themselves around the time we were just talking about the handset stuff, Jamie. Around the time they flogged their handset business to Microsoft, they split themselves into four. There's the NSN bit, and Nokia Siemens Networks. There was a handset bit. There was the HERE bit, which was SatNav. After they bought, oh God, it's gone. Anyway, they bought one of the two big map providers back 10, 20 years ago for tons of money. And then there was one other bit. I can't remember. But so they made these bits, and then they disposed of the handset and the HERE bit.
Yeah.
And so it made it easy. BlackBerry did the same when they were having a nightmare.
Even some of those are hard to sell, though, because they've... so the Nokia software business actually includes, as far as I'm aware, I think that now includes all of the core networks, like the mobile core stuff.
Right.
So
which they seem to be doing quite well on.
Yeah, and also it's kind of a fair, again, this end-to-end thing. Well, you're losing, you're giving away a big part of that sort of network story.
It's not end-to-end anymore, then, is it?
It's not just a software business that does what Microsoft does. It actually ties in with the network side of things, obviously. So it's a hard thing to flog. The licensing stuff, they've always positioned, Nokia Technology, they've always sort of positioned that as a big growth story in the future, because what they want to do is, if 5G eventually gets introduced into all sorts of devices and not just smartphones, then they see that as a much bigger kind of licensing opportunity for them.
And it's
the kind of thing that really excites investors. They always talk about the licensing business, even though it never makes anything. Yeah, it's very, very profitable because it's basically the lawyers litigating.
Just sitting there. Yeah.
So if you get rid of that, then you've got rid of a kind of big potential growth engine. And enterprise is, even though it's separate, it's kind of interlinked with a lot of the kind of network stuff, because they're kind of selling some of the same products. They've just got a different target market.
Yeah, and as we were just saying, the USP about 5G is mainly about enterprise anyway.
Yeah. So I don't think disposals or mergers are an easy thing for them to do. I think it's
someone in the industry that after I wrote the story, they got in touch with me, said, "What about BSS OSS stuff?"
Right.
Have they got something they could flog there?
Well, that's in the software side of things. I'm imagining.
Quite.
But that's because that's what it is.
But it's not. But it's I don't know to what extent OSS and core are.
Well, I mean, if you talk to because Ericsson gets asked this quite a lot as well on investor calls. Have you thought of, because that's digital services for them is OSS and BSS.
Yeah.
And it's not done very well. They've had to kind of get rid of a lot of contracts that weren't profitable or renegotiate them, and it's still not quite there. I think it's getting there. But
every quarterlies they go, it's on the mend.
And they always get asked by some analysts on the call about flogging that business because they've sold a lot of other stuff, the media, kind of cloud hardware. And Ecom always resists it because he says it ties in with the network story. We need to have that to go to customers with. It's not just about having the radio access networks. We need to have this side of things as well. So, and they don't make anywhere near as much of a big deal about this sort of end-to-end thing as Nokia, obviously, because they don't have a kind of big fixed line business. They don't have some of the transport and optical stuff. So,
right. Well, I mean, that's the whole play. I mean, that's a good point. So the Alcatel-Lucent, the whole pitch with the Alcatel-Lucent thing was end-to-end.
Yeah.
How plausible did you find that at the time, and how attractive do you think it is now?
Well,
I mean, it's plausible, obviously, as a fact, but as a desirable thing, do you want someone doing the whole?
Yeah, I mean, because I asked them that a year ago, I think I did get an interview with the CEO, Suri, and he was like, "Well, it does give us." If we can raise our sort of profile with a customer in one area, we often find it is leading on to conversations with them for other sort of follow-on sales. Yeah. So, and even though there weren't, I think at the time you were saying there weren't huge numbers of examples of companies that were kind of taking everything. He sort of saw that as something that would come.
Okay.
And there's lots of attractions. I mean, a lot of the operators now talk about multi-vendor stuff, don't they? They want more supply. They want to kind of not have one company doing everything. But then on the other side of things, in some ways, it's nice to have one company doing everything because it gives you, they say one throat to choke if something goes wrong.
That's a weird little metaphor they've started using.
And it gives you efficiencies, and it's just sort of easier to manage things that way. So, it's like for us having an aggregator that sells you all your kind of household services, like you take
the multi-play.
Some people do.
The multi-play telecoms.
You're really dependent on them, but it's an easy thing to manage. So
well, you got to think about what the size of the telcos are as well, because I mean, from a procurement perspective, you want to achieve scale as quickly as possible, and if you're a tier one player, you've got let's say X amount of thousands of base stations that you need. You can achieve scale through that, so you don't have to have end-to-end solutions. But if you're a minor player in a very small regionalised market, the only way you're going to achieve scale in the procurement process is if you bundle in more services on top of it. So if you're a tier 2, tier 3 vendor who's serving a very, very small footprint of customers, of course you want to go end-to-end, because buying radios off one, buying transmission gear off another, buying the software on top, or the OSS from somewhere else, and then paying a managed service provider or a service integrator to build it all of a sudden you might get an incredibly good best of breed product which is incredibly customized to your business specifications, but it's going to cost you an absolute bloody fortune. You'll bankruptcy yourself on the way. So, but tier ones, they've got the scale and the customer base to do that sort of thing.
Fair enough. That's a good point. I'm gonna move this one along a little bit because I think we've banged on about Nokia for quite a while, and we want to talk about the other stuff. There's a sort of natural link here though, Ian, to some of the stuff I was admiring some of your work on reading this week about ZTE.
Yeah.
So you've been doing a bit of sniffing around and the Chinese market, and one of your stories was how you think
well, it ties in with the Nokia stuff a bit.
Nokia's pain might be ZTE's gain. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean they've I can't say who, but they are sort of at the moment being quite, I think, aggressive and hopeful that they can sort of capitalise on some of Nokia's problems, I think, in the Chinese market in particular. That market's really sort of like, if you talk to analysts who are kind of cynical about China or sceptical about China, that market has always been seen as one that's been a bit rigged anyway. The Chinese companies do really, really well, and the Western companies have quite a small share. So I think Ericsson's got about 10%.
Which is still higher than I might have imagined.
Yeah, so someone I spoke to who I can't name, but they are a experienced industry analyst, was pointing out that Nokia's has been in a slightly risky position actually ever since the Alcatel-Lucent merger, because what happened then was that all of a sudden its market share went up in China, and therefore if any Western vendors are in the kind of current geopolitical climate, and China's decided that it should try and prop up its own domestic companies a bit more and give them a bit more of the pie. If there's any one business that you're going to look at maybe reducing its share, it's more likely to be Nokia, perhaps, because it's all of a sudden become.
Are you saying they got more than 10% share?
Well, I don't know what their share is.
Okay.
Ericsson claims 10%, and it makes, but it certainly would have gone up because they merged with Alcatel-Lucent. They took over Alcatel-Lucent's business there. So now I know what they make in revenues each year there. Ericsson makes $1.65 billion at today's exchange rates, is what it made last year in China, and Nokia's about $2 billion.
Okay,
but Nokia, obviously, end-to-end player, has optical products, so that doesn't necessarily mean it's got a bigger share of the mobile infrastructure market.
Fair enough.
But this analyst was saying they're in a slightly more vulnerable position anyway, simply because they've kind of increased their presence. And interesting, they were calling this out. Nokia themselves last July, they were sort of saying, there's growing support for local vendors in China. They mentioned this on an earnings call. We might have to consider our position there. We might have to consider how much we invest there.
I don't think there can be any doubt that since the ZTE and Huawei stuff that's happened in the last few years, the Chinese state is going to be like, well, we're going to make sure our lads are taken care of.
And
but they formalised that anyway. I mean, it's not a massive conspiracy theory, because Made in China 2025, there's a strategy to bring more of the international supply chain into China itself, so China becomes less reliant on international vendors and more reliant on its own domestic supply chain. So that is Made in China 2025 is a formal.
So there's that as well. So at the moment, what's happening is you've got these 5G contracts, the big sort of mass market contracts, due to be announced pretty soon, I think. ZTE's got. They say they've got about 35% of that market,
right?
And they're looking to try and increase that with. Now, I've always been a bit sceptical about ZTE in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. I think I've written a few stories almost kind of writing them off and saying, after everything that happened with US sanctions and, they're a subscale player anyway. You look at what they invest in R&D, it's much, much less than the really big guys. They've got closer connections to the Chinese government than Huawei, I think. They're always perceived as being more of a kind of state-linked company.
Agreed.
Something like 35% of their actual existing shares, shareholders are sort of like investment vehicles of government departments.
Yeah,
right.
So one of them is like the Chinese like aerospace department or something like that, and it's an investment vehicle owned by that, which owns something like 17% of ZTE.
Yeah, and so governments outside China are even warier of ZTE, I think, than they are of Huawei. And I think the UK decision actually banned. I mean, ZTE didn't have a presence in the UK really, but now they can't because they.
But I think that's because they were already quite severe restrictions in place, weren't they?
And now they're kind of.
And they've just said, we're going to keep that going.
So I've always sort of thought, is there really a future for a company like ZTE? But you look at their recovery, and you've written about this as well a few times. I think their financials, since the whole sort of sanctions thing was eventually lifted, and they managed to get things going again. They are doing, they have kind of bounced back quite well.
And you did a table, and I
did a table. Yeah.
Trend.
I mean, they're still, their revenues are still not quite they were even a few years ago, but they've gone up a lot. They're profitable again after racking up huge losses when this kind of shutdown happened. They couldn't get any US components.
Well, they nearly went out of business.
They say they've taken some steps to kind of diversify their own supply chains. And and then I was sort of thinking, well, they've always had this sort of reputation as being the real low cost guys. They did quite well in Africa and other emerging markets, and cheap and cheerful, and not really that good. So I when I was talking to Orange this week, I was asking them about them, and the guy there who I was chatting to, who's the head of the kind of 5G program, was really kind of like flattering about their stuff. He was like, look at the stuff they're doing even on the standalone 5G side now, and it's really, really good quality. So, and they have been making an effort to try and increase their R&D budget. So they're spending more now as a percentage of revenues than they used to. So maybe that's kind of coming.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? We've spoken loads of times about how hesitant we are to assume the worst of Chinese companies just by virtue of them being Chinese, and thus buying into the sort of US propaganda. But back to what we were just talking about. Jamie was mentioning that Made in China thing. When you're part of the World Trade Organization, one of the things you're supposed to sign up to is not favouring local champions within some kind of parameters. Part of the mutually agreed trade system of international trade is supposed to be that you're not protectionist, you're not constantly subsidising your own domestic champions. So that's a tricky one with that made in China thing.
Yeah, and the other thing is we don't know, that whole argument about state support for the big Chinese vendors and how they kind of compete unfairly. I mean, we still don't know how much of that's going on, and what kind of prop
Huawei
gets that Western vendors.
Huawei certainly claims it doesn't get much state support at all.
Yeah.
But again, you're like, well, would.
But I think that the thing about these big Chinese awards is that they can afford to be a bit less worried maybe at the moment about what does happen. And, if they're not that dependent on business in Western Europe anyway, because they have quite a small presence there. China's very much in with African sort of governments, and as everybody knows, and they've got quite a good presence there. It doesn't look like they're going to face too many setbacks and restrictions in that area, and they've got these huge Chinese contracts coming up. So their projection is they reckon there's going to be about it's 500,000 to 600,000 5G base stations deployed in China this year by the end of the year.
Wow.
Which is it's massive, obviously. You look at that compared to what other countries are going to build out over that time. So that's a huge amount of work.
What do you think? So I'm just trying to work out in terms of money. What can we pick an average price for a base station?
Yeah, well, I'd love to know what that is, but I don't know what the cost of a...
I've heard everything from between 10,000 to 25,000 per unit.
Yeah.
So...
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard 25 thrown out there.
Yeah.
But... Yeah, it's hard to. But then people have lots of caveats when they've told me. They say, "Oh yeah, but there's other things that get."
But even if we pick the low end of that and say 500,000 at 10k, that's still a lot of money.
You've done maths teaching, you can.
Yeah, well, 500,000 10k, just stick 4 more zeros on there.
Yeah,
what, 5 billion, something like that. Yeah, I think that's right. 5 billion.
Yeah. So it's
no,
so
this is 50 billion.
Everybody
50 billion.
Everybody wants to get into that market. This is why the Western vendors are so keen to sort of have some presence there. Like Ericsson's, one of its strategies at the moment is to try and improve that 10% market share in China. They're quite keen to try and grow their presence there as well, because
which would be one of the reasons actually why Ekholm every now and then comes out and says quite placatory stuff about Huawei and says, look,
is because of that.
Do you want to chill?
Yeah.
Because if he came out and got all bellicose about China, that wouldn't help his cause in the country at all, would it?
Yeah.
It's all quite interconnected, isn't it? So on the whole, you're saying that things look promising for ZTE. You back it to sort of keep?
I think there's a lot going on in the market at the moment that could sort of upset things this year to do with things like coronavirus and its impact on supply chains, and we don't know how that's going to work out.
And while it's not a main thing that we're going to talk about on this, we should note that just today I wrote a piece and there's stuff getting cancelled, and there's and there's stock markets going down the toilet.
Yeah.
It feels like we're in the middle of a bit of a moment of truth with that.
Yeah. So, but
by the time this actually gets published on Monday, let's see what's happened then.
But I feel more positive and optimistic about ZTE at the moment, just based on the markets where it does have a presence and where it's quite strong. I think they could sort of buoy it quite a bit over the next year. Yeah.
So investment, a complete sort of different one from this, but Jamie, you've been quite a while. You've been spending a lot of time looking into the investment climate, especially around fixed. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think I think this is like this year and towards the latter end of 2019. That it's very much a turning point for the telco industry. I think there's a lot of these sort of like investments bodies out in the US primarily, and in the city in London, and there's various ones scattered around Europe, who have never really liked the look of sort of like the mobile side of things. And realistically, there were better options for these guys to make returns. Not just talking about the likes of Goldman Sachs and stuff like that, but we're looking at like pension funds in the cities. Mm-hmm. These guys need to invest money in areas where they could probably make more money in the long run, and it's a safe bet. Yeah, realistically, there were better options.
Slightly beat sort of main index funds and that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, over the last like 6 or 7 months, I mean, you just been like. Fixed networks are basically becoming back in vogue. They're becoming very popular. Yeah, I mean, and you can just see it, whether it's from Goldman Sachs absolutely pumping, what was it, north of $500 million into City Fibre. Yeah. The altnets in the UK just seem to be hoovering up cash all the time. Whether it's like Community Fibre is growing all the time. I mean, who's actually realistically paying any attention to Community Fibre? Or there's one up in there's a council owned one up in Yorkshire, or there's Hyper Optic, and
there's that one in Hull.
Yeah,
Giga Clear's another one.
Giga Clear. There's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many, but they're all gathering momentum, and this sort of like the altnet, sort of like trend seems to be spreading across Europe now. I was speaking to someone over the last couple of days, and Germany looks like it's going to be a market where altnets start to gather momentum in the similar way they have done in the UK.
Wasn't there one there, Deutsche Glasfaser?
Yeah.
Recently,
They're sort of like, that's like the beginning of the trend, like what City Fibre was like 5 years ago. It was this sort of like very regionalised player which hoovered up a couple of distressed assets and then started to become more of a significant challenger on the fixed infrastructure market. And I think this is like, mobile has become quite a tricky one to invest in at the moment. 5G doesn't look like it's going to return the investments that it's promised all over the years. No one really knows how they're going to sell it to the enterprises, or at least not for the moment. But then fixed is an easy sell to these guys that want to make a return over 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And then even if you want to draw parallels into the mobile business, look at all the private equity that's getting involved in purchasing towers.
Yeah.
This is what, like 2020, I see one of the biggest trends is telcos losing control over the telecommunications industry.
Right.
They're going to farm out more share of their business and their owned assets to investments managers and to pension funds, and so they're going to lose as more influence on their actual industry. And before too long, especially the trends that are going at the moment, they might just be players that sit on the top of infrastructure.
Yeah,
especially the really hard embedded infrastructure as you describe, i.e., fixed line where you
mobile.
Mobile as well. Look at Vodafone.
But the towers as opposed to the radios themselves.
Well, yeah. This is a really interesting development. If I was someone like Cellnex, right? So Cellnex has been spending billions and billions and billions acquiring passive infrastructure across Europe. Now, this is on it's primarily on the mobile side, but they have been sort of entering into some agreements with for fixed assets as well. I'd be very, very interested, and I'd be having a lot of conversations with the likes of Parallel Wireless, with these sort of like vendor neutral hardware radio companies, and then I'd also be paying a lot of attention to network slicing, because realistically, if I own the passive infrastructure and I own all the cabling that's going in there, why can't I buy a radio and develop a network slicing model and sell virtual networks to the MNOs?
Yeah.
All of a sudden I could be a network owner from both passive and an active perspective, and then just slice my network up and start selling it to the MNOs.
Interesting. But surely there's other bits of core competence that operators have that these sort of newer entrants to the market don't.
Well, they're the customer-facing guys, aren't they? The operators,
right?
They're the people that deal with us, and they might go into content or something like that, or tailor services, and that's. But Jamie, the point, the Vodafone's an interesting example. They're already now sort of talking about, well, they have, haven't they? They've already set up this sort of holding company for their towers, and they're forming network sharing agreements and then talking about selling a stake in that or having an IPO of that business. So as you say, they're kind of losing control of some of the infrastructure that they've got. But
a lot of them, the interesting ones, this isn't so much happening in the UK, because I think MBNL and CTIL are set up to protect the four MNOs in the long run through joint investments.
Yeah.
But you look at, for instance, I can never pronounce it. What's the third player in France? Bouygues Telecom.
Took me a while to learn that one. Bouygues, is that right? Bouygues. Yeah. So why weren't we asking Pierre, for God's sake?
I think it should be Bouygues, though.
Yeah, Bouygues. That sounds better.
There's a Y in there. There's a Y.
Yeah. It's Bouygs.
There's a U in there. There's just no need for all those letters. There's many letters in French, Pierre. Do something about it.
But then,
how do you pronounce Altis? Is it Altis?
Altis? How is it spelled?
ALTICE.
Yeah, LTs.
LTs, yeah, I think this was. Yeah. But in any case, they've just sold their tower business to Cellnex.
Yeah.
So and then a couple of months back, Cellnex also bought all of Iliad's tower assets in France, and the majority of them in Italy, and then it also
so Cellnex is basically in control of France and Italy's tower infrastructure.
And it's a Spanish company. They got lots of stuff in Spain as well.
Not really. So they are a player in Spain, but France is their biggest single market. Right. Okay. They also own all of Arqiva's telecom
where are they getting the
business
cash for all
units.
this? I mean, is it from investment as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're just
private equity.
Yeah, well, they are to an extent, but they can also borrow loads as well, because they've got a backlog order book which is totaling more than 44 billion at the moment. So they're a company which currently turns over 1 billion a year in revenue, and they've got orders over the next 30 odd years for 44
so they're
billion.
a very safe bet for lending.
They're looking like a good company, but then at the same time, this is an asset which is not going to go out of business. When what would most people rather do? Own or lease or rent their own home, because this is the problem, the issue that the telcos are entering into at the moment. They're not owning their own home anymore. They're renting it, so they're never going to be able to get to a point where they're sort of economically that's sustainable, because they'll always have this.
Yeah. What if Cellnex turns around in the future and goes, right, well, 10 years' time, we don't like what you're paying us.
We'll double it.
I know you thought it was a good idea to sell it, because you can sort of, move things to sort of more OPEX-based model, but now your OPEX is going to go up a lot because we want this for these towers now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And there seems to be a trend over, 5 or 10 years of operators disposing of assets.
Yeah.
They seem to be in a constant state of anxiety about liquidity.
I'm wondering if regulators get involved in this, because if Cellnex and companies like that are becoming all powerful in some of these markets, and you don't have another company there to sort of balance things out, then I
think the regulators got their hands full with everything else, to be perfectly honest.
Sort of not looking at it.
Yeah, they can't really look at it. I mean, realistically, it's an equation which is becoming impossible to balance in the telco industry at the moment. It's like, someone was talking about it a while ago. I can't remember what conference I was at, but they were saying that over the last 10 years, profits and revenues in the telco industry have eroded massively, significantly, especially with MMS and sort of voice. SMS
and roaming and all that stuff.
Voice and roaming, especially with those revenues being killed off. But yet, this industry has been asked to find something like an extra 500 billion to invest in mobile. But then you've also got to consider the 5G deployments, the fibre deployments as well. So that's going to cost them a huge amount of money as well.
Yeah.
This equation isn't balanced. Money's got to come from somewhere, and private equity and these tower companies are saying, "We'll do it. We're quite happy to sit there and collect profits over the next 50 years when you want to see the exact same amount of profits over the next 10. It's like we're happy to play the long game.
And presumably these private equity types and these sort of fund manager types have diversified portfolios where there's some stuff which is like patient capital and some stuff which is more volatile, short-term punts. And this would presumably form in the former category. We're saying 10% of our stuff is entirely predictable. We know how it's going to perform over the next decade. It's all good.
I reckon so. But I mean, but then some of these investment managers and some of these VCs, their business model is long-term investments.
Yeah.
They don't have to chase after profits over the next 5 years because they've sold it to their clients and their investors. You invested us and we'll give you profit over a 25-year period. Who do these, the likes of KKR and stuff like that, their clients aren't going to be the likes of me and you all the time, punters that are just after a quick buck. Yeah. They're going to be representing...
How dare you downplay my portfolio?
But they're going to be investing sort of like pension funds. And you think, what's the objective of a pension fund? The pension fund is to secure profits over a 20 to 50-year period, because when I invest in my pension fund, I'm not going to realise the value of that for 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's I think it.
You're not that young, mate.
Yeah. But this is. I mean, it's the expectations which have been relayed to investors. Telcos and Nokia, for instance, has been relaying very high expectations for short to medium term, whereas these other companies are saying, invest in us, and we'll get you good profits, steady dividend over a very sustained long period of time. It won't be as much as Ericsson, but they might go bust.
Yeah, and as I think we said before, and I'll have to wrap it up. If fiber's not going to go away, no one's saying that fiber's going to be obsolete in 20 years because this new whizzy technology is going to come along.
I mean, this is the great thing about fibre as well. Sorry to interject there, is that no one actually knows how long it's going to last as well. So when you put fibre in the ground, there's generally like an agreement which says, right, this asset, sort of like copper, copper stops performing very badly after 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Like fibre, the telcos have been told, right, the lifetime, and we'll guarantee the lifetime of this asset for 40 years. There's certain things you've got to worry for, like water ingress, so that's water coming into the pipe and damaging the fibre optics, which is hence why they're put in the ground, not above the ground. But then when you get to the end of that 40-year life, I mean, no one knows how much it degrades because there isn't fibre in the ground which has been in there for 40 years. So we don't actually know what the performance of these products are beyond the 40 years. It could be
they know with copper because it's already happened, but they don't know.
We've got to that stage, but we don't know what the long-term performance of fibre actually is.
Yeah.
We can estimate, we can guess, but until you actually get there, you don't actually know.
Yeah.
And I'll be about the time you're retiring, Jamie.
Yeah. But it's. I think it's
we'll be gone by then.
Yeah.
The way the financial industry is getting more and more interested in telcos, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But telcos are going to become a smaller and smaller player in the telco industry as we move forward.
Well, I think it's a fun part. Just to wrap up, it's been a fun part of this particular job that I've been doing nearly 6 years. That I've trade journalist, but I'm covering something that is fairly often on the front pages as well. There could be other trades you cover that just stay very tradey, very in the back, behind the scenes. But this is a major concern, and getting ever more so.
The paper industry.
Yeah, something like that, or even other utilities like oil and gas. Something like that. But with politicians like Trump increasingly deciding telecommunications are matters of sort of primary national security and trade concern.
Yeah.
It's quite a fun thing. It gives us plenty to bang on about every week, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the investors must be absolutely crying that telco has been politicised now. As soon as an industry becomes politicised and you've got policies bouncing back and forth across the aisles in the House of Commons,
it's a lot less predictable.
It just becomes a bloody nightmare to actually manage, and that's what you blame. You blame Trump. Trump. You blame Bojo. But Corbyn's just as bad.
Oh, God,
going in there and saying we're going to nationalise broadband. It's become a political ping pong ball for the policy game, and it's going to be a negotiating tactic.
It is. Okay, cool. I'll wrap it up there, as I'm sure we've done about an hour, haven't we? So thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.